I'm going to read a happening from Moby-Dick and then tell a similar happening many years later. There is in Moby-Dick a chapter 124, called The Needle. It's morning after a severe storm. Lightning has hit the Pequod and caused the mastheads and even lanceheads to glow eerily. The corpusants, the frightened sailors call it. This is chapter 124, but just a part of it. Next morning, the not yet subsided sea rolled in long, slow billows of mighty bulk, and striving in the Pequod's girdling track pushed her on like giant palms outspread. The strong, unstaggering breeze abounded so that sky and air seemed vast outbellowing sails. The whole world boomed before the wind. Muffled in the full morning light, the invisible sun was only known by the spread intensity of his place, where his bayonet rays moved on in stacks. Emblazonings as of crowned Babylonian kings and queens reigned over everything. The sea was a crucible of molten gold that bubblingly leaps with light and heat. Long maintaining an enchanted silence, Ahab stood apart, and every time the teetering ship loweringly pitched down her bowsprit, he turned to eye the bright sun's rays produced ahead. And when she profoundly settled by the stern, he turned behind and saw the sun's rearward place, and how the same yellow rays were blending with his undeviating wake. Ha ha, my ship, thou mightst well be taken now for the sea chariot of the sun. Ho ho, all ye nations before my prow. I bring the sun to ye. Yoke on the further billows. Hello, a tandem. I drive the sea. But suddenly, reined back by some counter thought, he hurried toward the helm, huskily demanding how the ship was heading. East southeast, sir, said the frightened steersman. Thou liest, smiting him with his clenched fist, heading east at this hour in the morning, and the sun astern. Upon this, every soul was confounded, for the phenomenon just then observed by Ahab had unaccountably escaped everyone else. But its very blinding palpableness must have been the cause. Thrusting his head halfway into the binnacle, Ahab caught one glimpse of the compasses. His uplifted arm slowly fell. For a moment, he almost seemed to stagger. Standing behind him, Starbuck looked, and lo, the two compasses pointed east, and the Pequod was infallibly going west. But ere the first wild alarm could get out abroad among the crew, the old man, I have trouble with pages, with a rigid laugh exclaimed, I have it. It's happened before. Mr. Starbuck, last night's thunder turned our compasses, that's all. Thou hast before now heard of such a thing, I take it. Aye, but never before has it happened to me, sir, said the pale mate gloomily. Here it must be said that accidents like this have in more than one case occurred in ships in violent storms. The magnetic energy as developed in the mariner's needle is, as all know, essentially one with electricity beheld in heaven. Hence, it's not to be much marveled at that such things should be. Instances where lightning has actually struck the vessel so as to smite down some of the spars and rigging. The effect upon the needle has at times been still more fatal, all its loathsome virtue being annihilated, so that the before magnetic steel was of no more use than an old wife's knitting needle. But in either case, The needle never again of itself recovers the original virtue, thus marred or lost. And if the binnacle compasses be affected, the same fate reaches all the others that might be in the ship, even were the lowermost one inserted into the kelson. Deliberately standing before the binnacle and eyeing the transpointed compasses, the old man, with as sharp as his extended hand, now took the precise bearing of the sun, and satisfied that the needles were exactly inverted, shouted out his orders for the ship's course to be changed accordingly. The yards were hard up, and once more the Pequod thrust her undaunted bows into the opposing wind, for the supposed fair one had only been juggling her. I've had my own inverted compass. It happened once as we were sailing over the verdant green of eastern Venezuela. Our ship, you want to turn it off? Our ship was a small plane capable of holding 4, but with just 3 of us, 2 from Oklahoma and with ties, and the pilot, who was from Venezuela, but also had ties to Oklahoma, for he told us he knew El Reno. That's the location of the federal penitentiary. We had left Caracas and flown about 450 miles to the southeast, where we circled a number of times over Angel Falls, the highest waterfall in the world. We then headed southeast for Roraima, the lost world of Arthur Conan Doyle, near the juncture of Guyana, Brazil, and Venezuela, and near which we would refuel for the return trip. As we circled over Angel Falls, the verdant green below us turned to white as a sea of clouds formed, completely hiding the ground. I was in the back seat. It was afternoon. After some period of time, how long, I don't know, like Ahab, I realized that from the position of the sun, we couldn't be going southeast. We conveyed this to the Spanish-speaking pilot, who began beating on the magnetic compass, but to no avail. So we were heading in a southwesterly direction toward Brazil and the Amazon. Any direction but the one planned for would exhaust the fuel supply. Events showed that we had continued in this direction for about 200 miles. But then, in the endless sea of cloud, something happened that you may have trouble believing. There appeared below us a small opening, a green spot in the sea of white, the only opening in the clouds that we'd seen. And in the opening was a dirt airstrip. The opening was not much longer than the airstrip. We landed to an audience of scantily clad Indians and a young man who spoke Spanish. After visiting and getting directions to the nearest fuel, deciding our compass was now working, we left and reached the fuel supply on our last gallon. I now believe our compass problem was due to our being over rocks very rich in iron. The southwesterly quadrant, over which we had flown for 200 miles, has an area of about 30,000 square miles. Current aeronautical charts show that area to contain only one airstrip, the one we had found only because there was a coinciding hole in the clouds, the only one we had seen in 200 miles of flight. The odds seemed to be 1 in over 6 billion, or 20 times less likely than winning the Powerball lottery. I'm telling you this partly as a narrative and partly because it attests to my rational mind. For if a supposed rational person hides evidence, how is truth to be found? But I don't know the truth. I'm only sharing a mystery with you. Of course, people do win the Powerball lottery. A year after the Venezuela trip, I was sent to meet a small boat that was moving down the west coast of Greenland, and from which we would look at prospects. There were long waits at helipads and at an airport, waiting for solar storms to abate because they blacked out radio communication. Fortunately, I had taken a small copy of Moby-Dick, which I read again. Chapter 85, The Fountain, is about the whale spout and spouting. It ends with these words, "And how nobly it raises our conceit of the mighty misty monster, to behold him solemnly sailing through a calm tropical sea, his vast mild head overhung by a canopy of vapor, engendered by his incommunicable contemplations. And that vapor, as you'll sometimes see it, glorified by a rainbow, as if heaven itself put its seal upon his thoughts. For, do you see, rainbows do not visit the clear air. They only irradiate vapor. And so, through all the thick mist of the dim doubts in my mind, divine intuitions now and then shoot, enkindling my fog with a heavenly ray. And for this I thank God, for all have doubts, many deny. But doubts or denials, few along with them have intuitions. Doubts of all things earthly, and intuitions of some things heavenly. This combination makes neither believer nor infidel, but makes a man who regards them both with equal eye. Perhaps that would be Melville's intuition at finding a little hole in the clouds and the only airstrip in thousands of square miles. Perhaps it's mine.